If you'd have told me 10 years ago that the woman I loved most would one day look at my life and laugh, I'd have said you'd lost your mind. Because for most of my life, I believed love was enough, that hard work, honesty, and loyalty would hold two people together through anything. But I was wrong. Dead wrong. My name's Tom Walker. I'm 52 years old, born and raised in a quiet little town just outside of Nashville. I've always been a simple man, a mechanic by trade, the kind of guy who wakes up before the sun, drinks the same black coffee every morning, and smells like engine oil by noon. I wasn't fancy. I didn't wear suits or go to fancy dinners. But I had peace. I had my wife, Mary, my home, and my work. And back then, I thought that was everything a man could ask for. Mary was my world. We'd met when I was 28, and she was 24. She had this laugh, bright, like summer rain. We built our first home together, just a small one-story place with white siding and a front porch that creaked whenever you stepped on it. We didn't have much, but we made it ours. Every scratch on that wall, every faded patch of paint told a story. We spent nights talking about our dreams, how we'd grow old together, how she'd plant roses out back, and how maybe one day we'd take that long road trip down Route 66. We didn't have kids, but we had each other, and that was enough for me, at least. I thought it was. That morning, the morning everything changed, started like any other. I woke up before dawn, brewed my coffee, and looked out the window. The sky was grey, the kind of soft, cloudy grey that makes you think it might rain later. Mary was still in bed, or so I thought. I remember humming to myself as I grabbed my toolbox, getting ready for another day at the shop. I was halfway to the door when I noticed something strange. The kitchen light was on. Mary never left lights on. She used to tease me about how I'd forget. I walked into the kitchen, and that's when I saw it, a single white note sitting beside my coffee mug. Her handwriting was neat, curved, just like always. I felt my stomach twist as I picked it up, reading words that didn't even seem real. Tom, I can't do this anymore. I'm tired of this small life. I need more. That was it. No signature. No explanation. Just those words, cold, final, heartless. The coffee beside it was still warm, steam barely rising off the top, which meant she'd just been there minutes ago. I remember standing there, frozen, the clock ticking so loud it felt like a hammer against my skull. My hands were shaking, and for a second I thought maybe it was a joke. Maybe she'd come back in, laughing, saying it was some stupid test to see if I still cared. But the silence told me otherwise. I dropped the note and ran outside barefoot, the cold morning air hitting my chest like a slap. The gravel cut into my feet as I sprinted toward the road, praying to catch a glimpse of her old silver sedan. But all I saw was the faint trail of dust lifting off the dirt road. The last trace of the woman I thought I'd spend forever with. That's the thing about heartbreak. It doesn't crash into you like a wave. It seeps in slow, like a leak you didn't notice until it's already flooded the floor. I remember walking back inside, staring at that empty kitchen. The same walls, the same counters, the same coffee cup, but everything felt different, hollow. I sat down at the table, my breath shaking, and tried to make sense of it. What did she mean by more? More money, more adventure, more excitement. I'd given her everything I could. I worked long hours. I came home every night. I made sure she never had to worry about bills or broken things. I thought that meant something. I thought I meant something, but in her eyes, I was small. I found out later she'd met some guy, Rick Morgan, a real estate developer from the city. Slick hair, smooth talker, the kind of guy who wears cufflinks and calls everyone buddy. I remembered him vaguely. He'd been at a fundraiser Mary dragged me to a few months earlier. I didn't think much of it then. She'd laughed at his jokes, but she laughed at everyone's jokes. That was just her way. But apparently, that night had been the beginning of the end. When I realized that, I felt something inside me snap, like a quiet, invisible thread. I wasn't angry, not at first. Just empty. The days blurred together after that. I'd wake up, go to work, fix engines, come home, and stare at that empty chair across the table. I couldn't even bring myself to pack up her things. Her clothes still hung in the closet. Her favorite mug sat on the counter. I told myself I'd get rid of them tomorrow, but tomorrow always came and went. Weeks turned into months. Friends stopped asking how I was doing because I always gave the same answer. I'm fine, but I wasn't fine. I was just existing. Until one day, 6 months later, fate decided to twist the knife. I was at the local supermarket, just trying to grab groceries before heading home. I'd gotten used to being invisible. People nodding politely, some avoiding eye contact because they didn't know what to say after the divorce. I was standing in the canned food aisle when I heard it. That laugh, that same bright, ringing laugh I'd fallen in love with 20 years ago. I turned, my heart kicking against my ribs, and there she was, Mary, dressed head to toe in designer clothes. Her hair perfect, her makeup flawless, and right beside her, holding her hand like a trophy, was Rick. She saw me before I could look away. Her eyes widened for a split second, then that smile appeared, practiced, smug, and just sharp enough to cut skin. Tom. Oh my God, she said, her voice dripping with fake surprise. You still shop in here? That supermarket had been our place. The spot we'd go to every Sunday after church. The idea that she'd use that same tone, that same place, to mock me. It burned. I forced a small smile. Yeah, still shopping here. Still fixing cars. Still paying bills. Rick chuckled beside her, and I'll never forget the way he looked at me, like I was something stuck to the bottom of his shoe. Guess not everyone's built for success, huh? He said. A few people turned to look. I felt my face heat up. I wanted to disappear, to crawl under the floor. But I didn't. I just nodded, turned back to my cart, and walked away, keeping my head high even though every step felt like a mile. When I got home that night, I didn't cry. I didn't break anything. I just sat there, staring at that same kitchen table where her note still sat, faded now from the sunlight. And that's when something inside me shifted. All those months I'd been trying to move on, to forget. But that humiliation, that look in her eyes, it lit a fire in me that I hadn't felt in years. Because, in that moment, I made a silent promise to myself. I wouldn't just survive. I'd rebuild, quietly, patiently, and one day, when the time was right, the world and Mary would see exactly what kind of man they'd underestimated. That was the day everything truly fell apart. But it was also the day something new began. It's funny how life has a cruel sense of humor sometimes. You can go months trying to rebuild yourself, pretending that the worst is behind you, convincing yourself that you're finally healing, only for life to throw the very person who broke you straight back into your path, right when you least expect it. That's what happened to me that afternoon at the local supermarket. The same one I'd been going to for 20 years. The same one where Mary and I used to argue about what cereal to buy or laugh over how I'd always forget the milk. That day was supposed to be just another ordinary one. I'd closed up the shop early. Business had been slow lately, and I figured I'd use the extra hour to grab some groceries. The automatic doors slid open with that soft hum, and I remember thinking how strange it felt to walk through that place alone. I grabbed a cart, the same rattling one that always leaned a little to the right, and started down the aisles. My routine was the same as always. A few cans of soup for dinner, a loaf of bread, some oil and rags for the shop. I wasn't in a hurry, but I wasn't in the mood to see anyone either. The town was small, and gossip spread faster than a summer storm. Everyone knew about Mary leaving me, how she'd traded up. The sympathy in people's eyes was worse than the whispers. I'd gotten used to avoiding them, keeping my head down and focusing on the small things that still worked in my life. But then I heard it. That laugh, it cut through the quiet murmur of the store like a blade. Bright, echoing, familiar, too familiar. For a second, my hands froze on the cart handle. I hadn't heard that sound in months, yet it still hit me like a punch to the gut. There was a time when that laugh could turn my worst day into something beautiful. Now, it made the air in my chest turn heavy. I turned my head slightly, and there she was, Mary, standing just a few aisles away, radiant, polished, her hair shining under the fluorescent lights, like she was in some kind of commercial. She looked so out of place in that small-town store, like she didn't belong to the same world anymore. Her nails were perfectly painted, her dress expensive, her shoes the kind I used to tell her not to wear because they'd sink in the gravel outside our old house. But she wasn't alone. Next to her stood Rick Morgan, the man she'd left me for, the guy who'd probably smelled like expensive cologne and never had to scrub oil from under his fingernails. He had that polished, confident grin, the kind that came naturally to men who thought the world revolved around them. His hand rested on Mary's lower back, just casually enough to make sure everyone saw it. I felt something sink deep in my stomach. For a second, I thought about turning around and leaving my half-filled cart right there, just walking out and pretending I hadn't seen her. But before I could move, I heard her voice. "Tom." "Oh my God," she said, in that honeyed tone that always had a sting hidden underneath. "You still shopping here?" It was a simple question, but the way she said it, that slight tilt of the head, that half-smile curling at the corner of her mouth, it wasn't curiosity. It was mockery. A performance, maybe. For him, for the people nearby, for herself, even. I turned fully then, forcing myself to meet her gaze. My heart pounded in my chest like a drum, but I made sure my face stayed neutral. "Yeah," I said evenly. "Still shopping here. Still living. Still working." Her eyes flicked to the oil can in my cart and back to me. "Still running that, what do you call it, garage?" she asked, pretending to struggle for the word, though I knew damn well she remembered. She'd spent half her life there, bringing me lunch, helping with the books, painting that handmade sign that used to hang above the office door. I smiled, but there wasn't a bit of warmth in it. "Yeah," I said slowly. "Still fixing cars, still paying bills." That's when Rick stepped in, his smirk widening as he looked me up and down like he was inspecting a beat-up truck. "Guess not everyone's cut out for success, huh?" he said and laughed. That laugh, smug, hollow, arrogant, it echoed louder than anything in the store. I could feel people's eyes on us. A couple of familiar faces from around town pretended to browse the shelves, but I could tell they were listening. I could feel the weight of their pity. That's what cut the deepest. Not Mary's words, not Rick's condescension, but the quiet, suffocating pity in the air. For a split second, I wanted to lash out, to throw every bit of pain and anger I'd buried straight into their perfect faces. But instead, I just stood there. I took a slow breath, nodded once, and said, "Well, not everyone measures success the same way." Then I turned my cart and walked away. I didn't look back. But I could still feel their eyes burning holes in my back. My palms were sweating, my throat dry, but my steps stayed steady, each one heavier than the last. By the time I reached the checkout line, I could barely focus on the cashier's words. I handed over my card, grabbed my bag, and left without another word. Outside, the air was thick with the smell of gasoline and summer dust. I sat in my truck for a good 10 minutes, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was humiliated, completely and utterly humiliated. It wasn't just that she'd mocked me. It was how easily she did it. Like I was some stranger she'd outgrown. Like the 20 years we shared meant nothing more than a passing phase. The drive home was a blur. The tires hummed against the road, and the radio played soft country music I barely heard. When I got home, I tossed the groceries on the counter and sat at the table. The same table where she'd left that note. The same chair I'd sat in the day she walked out. It felt like the world had gone full circle, just to make me feel small again. But here's the thing. When you've lost everything, you eventually stop being afraid of losing more. You hit a point where the pain turns into something else. Something colder, sharper. I sat there, staring at the faint stain her coffee mug had left on the table years ago. And for the first time, I didn't feel tears welling up. I didn't feel that ache in my chest that used to keep me awake at night. I just felt quiet, empty, but not broken. And in that silence, something new stirred inside me. A thought, a spark, a dangerous whisper that refused to die down. What if I stopped trying to prove her wrong? What if I stopped letting her laughter define me? What if, instead of chasing her shadow, I built something so solid, so real, that even her mockery would sound hollow next to it? That night, I didn't sleep much. I sat up late, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with ideas, with possibilities I'd never allowed myself to dream before. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had been living too small. But maybe, just maybe, she'd given me the best gift of all by walking away, because that humiliation, as painful as it was, lit a fire I didn't know I still had. And that was the night I decided I wasn't going to be her regret. I was going to be her reminder, the living proof that quiet men can roar when pushed too far. Hitting rock bottom isn't like falling off a cliff. It's more like sinking slowly, inch by inch, until one day you realize you can't see the light anymore. Those first few months after that humiliating day in the supermarket were the hardest of my entire life. The silence in my house was louder than any noise I'd ever heard. The creak of the floorboards, the buzz of the fridge, even the ticking of the clock, it all reminded me of how empty everything had become. I'd wake up before dawn, not because I was eager to start the day, but because I couldn't sleep anyway. My bed felt too big, the sheets too cold. I'd sit at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee that always went cold before I could finish it, staring out the window at the same patch of road where I'd last seen her car drive away. Every morning, that sight hit me like a gut punch. The only difference was that over time, I stopped flinching. I guess that's how numbness works. You stop feeling the pain. Not because it's gone, but because you've grown used to carrying it. Work became my refuge. The garage, my sanctuary. I threw myself into fixing cars like it was all that kept me breathing. Every clink of a wrench, every hum of an engine, was a distraction from the thoughts clawing at my mind. I worked 12, sometimes 14 hours a day. I didn't go out, didn't see friends, didn't do anything that wasn't necessary. The old me, the easygoing, smiling Tom, was gone. All that was left was a man running on autopilot. But even as I drowned myself in routine, something inside me was shifting. That encounter at the supermarket had burned into my brain. The way Mary looked at me, with that smug little smirk, it haunted me at night. It wasn't about love anymore. It was about dignity, about pride, about not being the man people pitied or laughed at. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice started whispering, "You can do more. You can be more." One night I stayed late at the shop, sitting in the dim light of my small office, surrounded by grease-stained invoices and coffee cups. My hands were raw, my back ached, and I felt the weight of age pressing down on me. 52, too old to start over, too young to give up. That's when I opened my laptop, a beat-up old thing that barely ran, and started searching online. I didn't even know what I was looking for at first. Maybe a distraction, maybe a lifeline. But then I stumbled across a free video lecture titled "How Small Businesses Grow." I clicked on it out of curiosity, and I swear, something in me woke up. The man in the video talked about things I'd never thought about before: customer retention, marketing psychology, leadership. It was like hearing a foreign language that I somehow already knew the basics of. For years, I'd been fixing engines. Now I started to wonder, what if I could fix my life with the same patience and precision? That night was the first of many. I started watching every free lecture, every business talk, every workshop I could find online. I'd finish my workday, grab a sandwich, and sit in that tiny office with my laptop until the early hours of the morning. My eyes would blur from exhaustion, but I didn't care. I was learning again. I was growing again. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something that almost scared me. Hope, of course. People thought I'd lost it. My buddies from the auto shop would shake their heads, saying, "Tom, you're 50. Take it easy, man. You've done your time." They didn't understand that easy was exactly what got me here. Comfortable, content, unchallenged. I didn't want easy anymore. I wanted more. I started small. I took what little money I'd saved and upgraded my tools. Then I offered new services: tire alignment, detailing, engine diagnostics. It wasn't much, but slowly, customers started noticing. My work had always been good, but now it was efficient. I wasn't just fixing cars. I was building relationships. I made sure every customer left my shop feeling like they mattered. I gave them fair prices, quick turnarounds, and a handshake that meant something. Within a year, my business doubled. I hired 2 apprentices, young kids who reminded me of myself when I started. I taught them not just how to fix cars, but how to treat people, how to take pride in work even when no one's watching. By the second year, I'd saved enough to open a second shop in the next town over. It terrified me, honestly. Signing those papers, taking that leap, it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. But I did it anyway. I knew if I didn't take a risk now, I'd be stuck forever in the same loop of regret. Those were grueling years. My hands cracked from oil and cold. My back ached from standing too long, and sleep became something I caught in bits and pieces. But every time I felt like quitting, I remembered her voice. I need more. Fine, I thought. I'll show you more. By the third year, my name meant something in the county. Walker Auto and Fleet Services wasn't just a garage anymore. It was a brand. I had contracts with local businesses, delivery companies, even the sheriff's department. My trucks were everywhere. White vans with blue lettering, clean and professional, moving through the streets like a quiet army of proof that I'd risen from the ashes. But here's the thing. I didn't post about it. I didn't brag. I didn't go around showing off new cars or fancy suits. I still drove my same old pickup, still lived in that same small house with the creaky porch and chipped paint, because my success wasn't for show. It wasn't about revenge, not yet, anyway. It was about peace, about control, about finally feeling like I was steering my life instead of watching it crash. Sometimes I'd catch myself wondering what Mary and Rick would think if they saw me now. I knew they still lived nearby. Small towns have long memories. I figured they still thought of me as that same broken man in the supermarket, the one who couldn't look them in the eye. And maybe that was for the best. Maybe I wanted them to keep thinking that, because the sweetest kind of victory isn't loud or obvious. It's the quiet kind that sneaks up on people when they least expect it. So I kept building, kept growing, kept learning. I invested not just in my business, but in myself. I read about leadership, discipline, patience. I started seeing challenges as puzzles instead of problems, and the deeper I went, the more I realized something that changed my whole perspective. I didn't need to destroy anyone to feel whole again. I just needed to become the man I was always meant to be, the one she never believed I could become. But even then, deep down, there was still a part of me that waited for that moment, that inevitable day when our worlds would collide again, because I knew it was coming, and when it did, I wanted her to see me, not as the man she left behind, but as the man she should have never underestimated. It was a quiet Friday evening, the kind that smelled faintly of rain and motor oil. The sun had just slipped below the tree line, painting the shop windows gold, and I was closing up for the day. My shirt was stained with grease, my hands were aching, and I was looking forward to nothing more than a hot shower and a quiet night at home. That's when I noticed the white envelope sitting on the counter by the office door, thick, expensive, with my name written across the front in elegant gold letters. For a moment, I thought it had to be a mistake. No one sent me letters like that. Bills came in thin envelopes. Job orders were printed on cheap white paper. But this had weight. I picked it up and ran my thumb along the embossed edge. The paper was heavy, the ink glossy. It smelled faintly of perfume, a scent I hadn't encountered in years, but would have recognized anywhere. I stood there for a long second, just staring at it, my chest tight with something I couldn't name. Curiosity, dread, maybe both. I tore it open, slow and careful, like I was afraid it might explode. Inside was a crisp invitation card, framed in gold foil, Morgan Real Estate Annual Charity Gala. right below the printed details. A handwritten note in looping cursive. Tom, you should come. It's for a good cause. Besides, it's been years. Maybe we can finally be friends. Friends. That single word hit me harder than I expected. It was almost funny. The woman who walked out on me without a backward glance, who'd stood in a grocery store aisle and laughed at my life, now wanted to be friends. I laughed. I laughed so hard I almost dropped my coffee mug. The sound of my own laughter echoed through the shop, sharp, bitter, disbelieving. Friends, I said aloud to no one. Sure, why not? But when the laughter died down, I just stood there holding that letter, feeling the weight of it in my hand. I ran my fingers over her handwriting, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel heartbreak. What I felt was ready. For so long, I'd built my life quietly, staying under the radar, keeping my success to myself. My company had grown beyond anything I'd ever imagined. 3 shops now, a staff of 20, and contracts with half the city's logistics companies. I'd turned Walker, Auto, and Fleet Services into a local powerhouse, all while staying invisible to the people who once wrote me off. But now she was inviting me into her world, a world of champagne, silk dresses, and small talk about money. A world she once told me I didn't belong to, and suddenly I knew exactly what I was going to do. I'd go, not as the man she left behind, not as the guy with oil-stained hands and worn-out boots. I'd walk into that room as the man I'd become, calm, confident, not to rub it in her face, not to seek revenge, just to show them both that I'd rebuilt myself from the ground up, that I didn't just survive, I thrived. That night, I sat in my living room with the invitation propped up on the table, the golden lettering catching the lamplight. I could almost hear her voice again, the same soft, patronizing tone she used when she said, "Tom, you'll never understand ambition." I smiled to myself. Guess we'll see about that. The following week, I got a new suit tailored, navy blue, sharp but simple. I didn't want to look like I was trying too hard. I wanted to look like a man who belonged anywhere he chose to be. The tailor fussed over the fit, complimenting the cut of my shoulders, the way I carried myself. I wasn't used to that kind of attention, but I realized something. I'd earned it. Every inch of that confidence had been paid for in long nights and hard work. When the day of the gala came, I took my time getting ready, polished my shoes till they shone, tied my tie twice before it sat perfectly. I looked in the mirror, half expecting to see that same weary mechanic staring back at me, but he was gone. What I saw instead was a man who'd been through fire and come out tempered harder, sharper, quieter, driving to the event. I couldn't help but think about how different this night would be from all the others I'd spent alone. The roads were lined with city lights, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something that wasn't bitterness. I felt anticipation. When I pulled up to the hotel, I almost laughed again. Valets in crisp uniforms, chandeliers glittering through the glass doors, luxury cars lined up along the curb. I remembered the old days, Mary dragging me to parties like this, whispering for me to act a little classier, or try not to talk about cars too much. Back then, I'd felt out of place. Tonight, I felt composed. I handed my keys to the valet and stepped inside. The lobby smelled like money, a mix of polished marble, perfume, and old wine. Laughter rippled through the air, soft and artificial. People moved in elegant clusters, smiling too wide, holding champagne flutes like trophies. And there she was, across the room, radiant in a silver gown, her hair swept up, laughter tinkling like wind chimes. Mary Morgan now, standing beside her. As expected, was Rick. Still tall, still smug. His arm around her waist like he was showing off something expensive he'd bought. I paused by the entrance, watching them for a second. Not with anger, not with longing. Just observation. They looked happy, but it was the kind of happiness that cracked at the edges, polished but hollow. Then, as if sensing me, Mary turned. Her eyes widened just slightly, surprise flickering across her face before she caught herself and smiled. That same smile that once made me weak, now just made me steady. "Tom," she said when I approached. Her voice was warm, practiced. "You came." I smiled back, calm and deliberate. "Wouldn't miss it." Rick gave a quick, polite laugh. "Tom Walker. Still fixing cars." I met his gaze, unflinching. Among other things, he didn't press further, but I saw the faint confusion in his eyes. The same look rich men get when they realize they can't quite measure. The man standing in front of them, Mary's eyes drifted over me, subtle but searching. The tailored suit, the calm demeanor, the lack of any hint of bitterness. She wasn't sure what to make of it. And for the first time in years, I had the upper hand, not because I wanted to win, but because I no longer needed to. As the evening unfolded, I mingled, talked, laughed. Not once did I mention my business. I didn't have to. Word had a way of traveling on its own at one point. I caught Mary glancing my way again, that polite social mask slipping for just a moment. Maybe she was wondering when I'd stopped being the man. She thought she knew, and as I raised my glass in a quiet toast from across the room, I thought, this isn't revenge, it's revelation. She'd invited me, thinking I'd be the same man. Awkward and small in a world that once made me feel lesser, but tonight, she was going to see the truth that I'd never needed her world. I'd built my own. The night of the gala felt like the final chapter of a book I didn't know I'd been writing for years. Every decision, every late night, every moment of humiliation, they'd all led to this. I wasn't just showing up for some social event. I was walking straight into the heart of my past, carrying with me every scar, every lesson, and every ounce of quiet strength I'd earned along the way. For weeks before the gala, I'd prepared. Not in the way Mary or Rick would have. No rented limos or custom jewelry. My kind of preparation was simple, methodical, deliberate. I bought a new navy blue suit, tailored perfectly to my frame. Not flashy, but cut with quiet precision. I polished my old pickup truck until it shone like it had rolled out of a showroom. The chrome gleamed under the sun, the paint reflected the sky. That old truck wasn't just a vehicle anymore. It was a symbol of everything I'd built, everything I'd become. I could have arrived in one of my company cars, but that truck had been with me since the beginning, through all the sleepless nights and broken moments. It had earned its place beside me. When I looked in the mirror before leaving the house that evening, I almost didn't recognize myself. My hair was neater, my beard trimmed close, and there was a steadiness in my eyes I hadn't seen in years. The man staring back at me wasn't broken anymore. He was forged stronger for everything he'd been through. By the time I reached the hotel, the parking lot was already full of shiny luxury cars, the kind that made statements. My old Chevy rumbled into a spot near the front entrance, its engine purring low and steady, and for some reason I smiled. I didn't feel out of place this time. I felt grounded, like I belonged here, not because of what I wore or what I drove, but because of what I'd built with my own hands. When I walked through those glass doors and into the ballroom, heads turned, not because I was the richest man in the room, or because my suit screamed status, but because I walked in tall, confident. There was no desperation in my stride, no need for approval, just quiet power, the kind that speaks without saying a word. The room itself was a showpiece, chandeliers dripping with crystals, white tablecloths glowing under golden light, a band playing soft jazz in the background. Waiters floated around with trays of champagne. Conversations buzzed, laughter tinkled like glass. It was the kind of environment where I once would have felt like an imposter. But tonight, it was different. I wasn't pretending. Mary saw me first. I caught her gaze from across the room, and I swear her smile froze mid-air. She was standing near the stage, surrounded by her circle of polished acquaintances, one hand resting lightly on Rick's arm. But when her eyes met mine, her whole posture changed. Her shoulders stiffened. Her hand slipped off his arm, and for a brief moment, she looked like someone who'd seen a ghost, except this ghost had come back looking far better than when he'd left. I took my time walking toward her, every step slow, unhurried. Rick turned, curious about what had caught her attention. When he saw me, his expression twisted, confusion first, then mild irritation, then disbelief. "Tom," Mary said, her voice cracking slightly before she caught herself. She tried to recover, that practiced social smile snapping back into place. "You look different." "Yeah," I said with a grin that came naturally. "I guess quiet lives aren't so bad when they grow loud." The group around her chuckled politely, not really understanding the weight behind the words. But Mary did. She blinked, processing the man in front of her, the clean-cut suit, the calm posture, the self-assured tone. The man who used to slouch beside her in overalls was now standing straight and unbothered in a suit that fit him like success. Rick extended his hand, forced but civil. "Tom Walker. Been a while. Still running that little shop of yours?" I took his hand firmly, not to crush it, just enough to make him feel the strength there. "Yeah," I said casually. "Still fixing engines. Still paying bills. Oh, and by the way," I let my tone stay light, conversational. "Walker Fleet Services is one of the sponsors for tonight's event. You might have seen our trucks around town." For a second, Rick's confident smirk faltered. Just a flicker, but I saw it. His hand loosened in mine. Mary's jaw went slack, her eyes darting around the room as if to confirm what I'd just said. And sure enough, there it was, printed neatly at the bottom of the event banners, right next to the list of major sponsors. Walker Fleet Services. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something, but no words came. They had seen my truck's bright silver service vans, with bold blue lettering all over town. They'd passed them on highways, parked outside offices, maybe even called one when their luxury SUV had broken down. But they never imagined those trucks had anything to do with me. Rick cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. "Well, good for you, Tom. Didn't think cars could turn into charity checks." I smiled. "Guess it depends on how you drive them." A few people around us laughed, light and polite. Mary didn't. She was too busy staring at me, trying to reconcile the man in front of her with the one she'd left behind. As the night went on, I mingled, shaking hands with business owners, city officials, and other sponsors. People approached me, curious about my company, complimenting the reliability of my fleet, asking if I'd consider contracts for their businesses. Every conversation built another layer of quiet satisfaction inside me. Not arrogance, not spite, just peace. At one point, I caught Mary standing by the bar, watching me. She tried to hide it by pretending to sip her drink, but her eyes kept following me across the room. There was no mockery in them now. No superiority. Just something she couldn't quite mask, regret. Later that night, the event organizer invited all the sponsors to the stage for a quick photo. I walked up with the others, the photographer calling out names. Tom Walker, Walker Fleet Services, she said into the mic. The crowd clapped. Even Rick, reluctantly, clapped. And as the flash went off, I stood there smiling. Not the smile of a man proving a point, but the smile of someone who'd finally outgrown the need to. Afterward, Mary approached me one last time, her voice quieter now, stripped of its edge. Tom, she said, I didn't know you were doing so well. I looked at her for a moment, really looked. She still looked beautiful, but there was something different now. The shine in her eyes wasn't confidence. It was curiosity mixed with uncertainty. I didn't need anyone to know, I said softly. That's the difference. For a second, neither of us said anything. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was full of everything that didn't need to be said. All the years, the pain, the lessons. Finally, I gave a small nod. You take care, Mary. Then I turned and walked away. As I stepped out of that ballroom, the night air hit me. Cool, crisp, alive. My old pickup was still there, gleaming under the streetlights. I ran my hand along the hood, got inside, and started the engine. For a moment, I looked in the rearview mirror at the glowing hotel entrance behind me, the marble floors, the laughter spilling out, the world I'd once tried so hard to fit into. Then I smiled and drove off into the quiet night, because for the first time in my life, I realized something. I didn't need to belong in their world. I'd built one of my own, and it was louder, stronger, and far more real than anything they'd ever had. The months that followed, that gala felt like stepping into a new season of life, one that tasted different, lighter, somehow. I didn't walk out of that hotel feeling victorious. I walked out feeling complete. For the first time in years, I wasn't chasing closure. I had it. And funny enough, that peace ended up being the quiet storm that turned everything upside down, because a year later, everything flipped. Rick Morgan, the self-proclaimed visionary of real estate, the guy who laughed at me for fixing cars, was suddenly on the wrong side of a market crash. Interest rates climbed, new housing projects stalled, and buyers dried up faster than morning dew in August. The same flashy developments that once made headlines were now sitting half-built, bleeding money. Investors pulled out, lawsuits started piling up, and Rick's name, once gold, began circling the rumor mill in all the wrong ways. I didn't celebrate it. Not out loud, anyway. I'd learned that revenge doesn't have to be loud to be satisfying. Sometimes, life does all the heavy lifting. You just have to sit back and let it. The irony, though, that was the sweet part. Because while Rick's empire was crumbling, his company's logistics division, the part that handled transportation for building materials and site maintenance, had been quietly outsourcing to Walker Fleet Services for nearly a year. They'd signed on after the gala. One of his managers, impressed by our efficiency and reputation, I didn't even realize who I was serving until I saw a delivery order labeled Morgan Properties, Site 11B. I remember that day vividly. I stood in my office, staring at the invoice, a slow smile spreading across my face. I didn't call them out. I didn't cancel the contract. I didn't even raise the prices. I just approved the order and told my drivers, make sure everything's on time. Clean trucks, full uniforms, top-tier service. Because nothing, and I mean nothing, stings more than being humbled by the man you once mocked every month. Rick's company cut me a check. Every week, my drivers pulled up to his sites in spotless trucks, engines humming smoothly with the same blue logo that used to make Mary's jaw drop, Walker Fleet. Services bright and bold on the sides. I'd see those trucks driving through town sometimes, passing by one of Rick's half-finished developments. I'd nod to myself, not out of pride, but out of a strange sense of poetic balance. Life has a way of straightening things out, given enough time. Then came the call. It was a Thursday afternoon, late spring. Business was steady, my crew was out on jobs, and I was in my office catching up on invoices. My desk phone buzzed, and I glanced at the screen. Unknown number. Normally, I'd let it ring, but something, maybe instinct, made me pick up. Walker Fleet Services, I said. There was a pause, then a soft, familiar voice, hesitant, almost fragile. Tom, it's Mary. I leaned back in my chair, surprised but calm. Her voice hadn't changed much, still that melodic tone that once filled my kitchen. But now it trembled, uncertain. Mary, I said evenly, didn't expect to hear from you. She let out a small, shaky breath. I didn't know if I should call, but I didn't know who else to talk to. I didn't say anything. I just listened. Sometimes silence tells you more than words ever can. Rick's been having a hard time, she continued, her voice breaking a little. The business. It's not good, Tom. Things are bad. We might lose the house. I could almost picture her sitting there, clutching the phone. The same hands that once wrote that cold goodbye note now shaking. I'm sorry to hear that, I said quietly. There was another pause, longer this time. Then, in a tone so soft I almost didn't catch it, she said, Tom, can we talk? Maybe over coffee, like old times. I looked out the office window, watching one of my trucks roll out onto the main road. The driver waved as he passed, young kid, full of promise. I thought about the years I'd spent in silence, rebuilding what she'd helped break. About how every night of loneliness had turned into fuel, every insult into motivation. And then I thought about that first morning she left, that cold cup of coffee sitting beside a goodbye note. I smiled, not cruelly, but with a calmness that came from somewhere deeper. I don't think so, I said finally. I've got a quiet life to get back to. She didn't say anything right away. Just silence on the other end, the kind that tells you someone's trying to hold back tears. Then, in a whisper, you sound happy, Tom. I am, I said simply. Take care, Mary. I hung up before she could reply. For a while, I just sat there, the phone still warm in my hand, feeling. Not triumph, not even satisfaction, just peace. Real peace. Because that was the moment I realized revenge wasn't about destroying someone else's life. It was about rebuilding your own so well that their opinion, their laughter, doesn't matter anymore. That call was the closure I didn't know I needed. A week later, I saw her in town, sitting alone outside a small cafe, staring into her cup like she was trying to find answers in the steam. Our eyes met briefly through the window. She smiled, small, tired, but genuine. I nodded once and kept walking. She'd laughed at my quiet life once. Now, it was all I needed. And as I drove back to the shop, the sun setting behind me and the road stretching out ahead, I thought to myself, maybe that's the real sweetness of life. Not in payback or pride, but in peace. Because the best kind of revenge isn't loud. It's living well enough that you don't have to say a word. It happened on a quiet Saturday morning, one of those calm, golden mornings when the world feels like it's finally exhaled. The sky was clear, the air smelled faintly of rain from the night before, and I was in my usual spot, the local supermarket I'd been shopping at for years. I wasn't expecting anything extraordinary that day. Just a few groceries, maybe some fresh coffee beans, and a peaceful drive home. But life has a funny way of circling back, doesn't it? Sometimes it doesn't shout. It just whispers, it's time. I had just turned down the cereal aisle when I saw her dot. Mary, it took me a second to even recognize her. The woman standing by the dairy section wasn't the same Mary I remembered, not the radiant, sharp-dressed real estate wife who walked out of my life with perfume and pride trailing behind her. This Mary looked smaller somehow, her shoulders slumped, her eyes hollowed by sleepless nights. The spark that once lit up her face had dimmed into something softer, something that carried the weight of time, loss, and realization. She turned her head, and when our eyes met, she froze. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The store's soft music filled the silence, some old tune from the 80s that used to play in my garage radio when life was simpler. Then, slowly, she stepped closer. "Tom," she whispered. My name came out shaky, like she wasn't sure she had the right to say it anymore. "Mary," I said, calm as ever. My tone wasn't cold, just steady, like a man who'd made peace with every ghost that used to haunt him. Up close, I saw what the years had done. The makeup couldn't hide the fine lines, the tired eyes, the kind of sadness that doesn't come from a bad day, but from a life spent chasing the wrong things. She looked down, fiddling with her purse strap, like a nervous schoolgirl. "You look good," she said finally, forcing a small smile. "Different, I could say the same," I replied, though we both knew I didn't mean it. There was a long pause. Then her voice cracked as she said, "You were right." I tilted my head slightly. "About what?" "About everything," she said, eyes glistening. "I thought money would make me happy. I thought being with someone successful meant I'd never have to feel small again. But I was wrong. It didn't make me happy, Tom. It made me empty." Her words hung in the air like smoke. For a second, I saw flashes of the past, the dinners we used to share, her laughter echoing in the kitchen, the night she packed her bags. I remembered the sting of that betrayal, the way she walked away without looking back. And yet, standing there, in that grocery store, I didn't feel anger anymore. Just a strange, quiet understanding. "Mary," I said softly, "you didn't need to believe in me back then. I just needed to believe in myself." She looked at me with tears in her eyes, tears not of guilt, but of realization, of seeing, at last, what she'd thrown away. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't know you had this strength in you." I smiled faintly. Neither did I until I had to find it. For a long moment, she stood there, just nodding, her hand covering her mouth like she was trying not to cry. Around us, Life carried on, carts rolling by, kids laughing, someone arguing over a coupon at the next register. It was surreal how the world could stay so ordinary, while two people closed a chapter that once defined their lives. Finally, she said, Rick left. After everything fell apart. He couldn't handle it. I'm on my own now. I nodded slowly. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it, but not in pity. In compassion. Because I'd been there too, once. Alone, broken, trying to make sense of the ashes. She looked at me, desperate for something, forgiveness maybe, or a second chance, or just a moment of warmth to remind her she wasn't invisible. But the truth was, I didn't owe her any of those things, and I didn't need them either. Tom, she said again, her voice trembling, do you ever think things could have been different? I smiled, a real smile this time, gentle, peaceful, free. No, I said. I think things turned out exactly how they were meant to. She blinked, taken aback by how easily the words came. Then she nodded, a sad, understanding nod. You're happy now, aren't you? I am, I said simply. Happier than I've ever been. And it was true. Because happiness isn't always about what you gain. Sometimes it's about what you let go of. The tears she'd been holding back finally spilled over, but I didn't reach out to wipe them. That wasn't my place anymore. Instead, I just stood there, watching as she gathered herself, her chin trembling. She whispered, I'm glad you found peace, Tom. Me too, I said. Take care, Mary. Then I turned, pushing my cart toward the checkout lane. I didn't look back. I didn't need to, because that was the final page of a story that had once been written in pain but ended in peace. As I stepped out into the sunlight, the warmth hit my face, and I breathed deeply, free, grounded, whole. The parking lot glowed with that late morning light, and I thought to myself how poetic life really was. I'd fallen, I'd broken, I'd rebuilt, and now I was walking away not as the man who lost, but as the man who learned, for the first time in years. I walked away smiling, not because I'd won anything, but because I finally understood what mattered. It wasn't revenge, it wasn't redemption, it was peace, the kind that only comes when you forgive. Not for them, but for yourself. And as I loaded my groceries into the back of my truck, I realized that life, in its quiet wisdom, had given me the best ending I could have asked for. Not applause, not revenge, just peace, pure, quiet, earned peace. Time has a way of healing things you once thought would scar forever. The bitterness fades, the sleepless nights stop haunting you, and one morning you wake up and realize you're no longer surviving, you're living. That's exactly what happened to me. After everything, the betrayal, the humiliation, the years of rebuilding, my business didn't just grow. I Did Walker Fleet Services became more than just a business. It became a legacy. What started as one small town garage, a man with greasy hands and a broken heart, had grown into a respected name across the region. We had trucks on the highways, contracts with major companies, and a team of people who looked up to me not just as their boss, but as a mentor. I'd built something from nothing, not with luck or money, but with grit, sweat, and the kind of quiet persistence most people overlook. But the funny thing is, success didn't fill me up the way I thought it would. Money came, recognition followed, and yet, deep inside, I knew my purpose had shifted. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong anymore. It wasn't about revenge. It was about meaning, giving something back to the world that had once left me behind. So, when the local community college reached out one day, asking if I'd consider teaching a course on automotive repair and small business management, I hesitated at first. Me, a teacher. I was a mechanic who learned life the hard way, not a professor with fancy degrees. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. If I could help someone avoid the mistakes I made, if I could show a young person that their worth wasn't defined by how others saw them, then maybe that was my real victory. The first day I stepped into that classroom, I felt a lump in my throat. There were about 20 students, some fresh out of high school, some older folks trying to start over. I looked at their faces and saw versions of myself in every one of them. Dreamers, doubters, hard workers who'd been told they'd never make it big. I smiled and said, "All right, let's get our hands dirty." We started small, learning how engines breathe, how timing belts work, how to read a manual without losing your mind. But somewhere between the grease and the laughter, I began teaching more than mechanics. I taught them what no book ever could, how to keep going when everything falls apart. See this, I'd say, holding up a rusted bolt that refused to turn. This is life. Sometimes you twist and twist and it won't budge. But you don't quit. You change your grip, find new leverage, maybe add a little heat, and eventually it loosens. Everything loosens with time and persistence. They'd laugh, not realizing it was more than a metaphor. It was the very thing that had saved me. Word spread fast about my classes. Soon I had young people lining up, wanting to learn not just about cars, but about resilience, about self. Some of them came from broken homes, others from dead-end jobs. Some just needed someone to tell them they were capable of more. And every time I saw that spark light up in their eyes, that moment when they realized they could do it, it reminded me why I'd chosen this path. Sometimes, after class, I'd sit in my truck, watching the students walk out, laughing and chatting, oil-stained hands waving in the air, and I'd smile because that used to be me. A dreamer who thought life had already passed him by. On weekends, I'd visit my old shop, the one where it all started. I never changed the sign. It still read Tom's Auto Honest Work, fair price. My crew knew that shop was sacred ground, the birthplace of everything that followed. Some nights, I'd sit on the old wooden bench outside, the same one Mary and I used to drink coffee on, and I'd think about how strange life could be. 10 years ago, people saw me as a failure, a man abandoned, humiliated, stuck in a small life. But now, people would come up to me at the diner or on the street and say, "Tom, you're an inspiration." It always made me chuckle, because I hadn't done anything magical. I just kept going when life told me to stop. One afternoon, during a community event, a local journalist interviewed me. She asked, "Tom, what's your secret? How did you turn everything around?" I paused for a long moment before answering. "There's no secret," I said finally. "You just take what's broken and fix it, whether it's an engine, a business, or yourself. You don't give up on it just because it takes time." She smiled and said, "So would you say you've redeemed yourself?" I looked out at the crowd, my employees, my students, people who once thought I'd never make it. Then I shook my head and said, "No, ma'am. I didn't redeem myself. I just remembered who I was." That line ended up printed in the local paper, and for weeks, people stopped me on the street to talk about it. But what they didn't know was that it wasn't some deep, planned quote. It was just the truth. I hadn't changed into someone new. I'd just returned to the man I was always meant to be before life and heartbreak clouded him. The redemption wasn't in money, or fame, or the business. It was in peace, in purpose, in teaching others that no matter how low life takes you, you can always build again. I still go to that same supermarket sometimes. I still drive my old truck, the one I polished for that gala years ago, and every time I look in the mirror, I don't see a man who was mocked, betrayed, or left behind. I see a man who found freedom not by proving someone wrong, but by becoming someone better, because the truth is, redemption doesn't come with applause. It comes quietly in the moments you choose kindness over bitterness, wisdom over anger, and growth over revenge. And if you'd told me all those years ago that I'd end up here, not bitter, not broken, but whole, I would have laughed. But now I just smile, because I know that sometimes the quietest lives leave the loudest legacies. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when life decided to remind me just how unpredictable and poetic it can be. The kind of morning where the world feels still, peaceful, like it's holding its breath. I'd just finished my coffee and was sorting through a small pile of mail, the usual stack of bills, flyers, and business catalogs, when I noticed an envelope that stood out. It was handwritten. Real ink, real penmanship, the kind you don't see much anymore. The return address said Morgan Residence. My stomach tightened for a moment, not out of anger or dread, but from pure surprise. I hadn't heard that name in a while. Curiosity got the better of me. I tore it open carefully, unfolded the crisp white paper, and began to read. Dear Mr. Walker, it started. My name is Sarah Morgan. I'm Rick Morgan's daughter. I stopped there for a second, blinking. I hadn't thought about Rick in months. Last I'd heard, he'd sold off part of his business and moved to a smaller office in the outskirts of town. The man who once wore arrogance like cologne had gone quiet, and truthfully, I respected that. Life had humbled him, and he'd chosen to live quietly afterward, just like I had. I continued reading. My father says you're the most honorable man he's ever met. He told me once that if I ever wanted to understand what real strength looks like, not the loud kind, but the kind that lasts, I should meet you. I'm studying business management at the university, and I'd be honored to intern at your company this summer. I want to learn how you built something so genuine and lasting. I sat there for a long time after reading those words, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. Rick Morgan, the man who once mocked me, the man who stood beside my wife while she humiliated me in the middle of a supermarket, had told his daughter, I was an honorable man. If that's not life coming full circle, I don't know what is. I leaned back in my chair and let out a long breath, staring out the window at the rows of company trucks lined neatly in the parking lot. Each one bore the same name, Walker Fleet Services. My name, my legacy, my life's work. I thought about how far I'd come from the man who once sat alone in his kitchen, staring at a cold cup of coffee and a goodbye note. About how pain, if you let it, can turn into fuel. About how losing everything can sometimes be the best thing that ever happens to you if you choose to build again. I looked back down at Sarah's letter. Rereading the words, honorable man, I smiled. Not out of pride or arrogance, but because of what it meant. It meant the story that began with humiliation had ended with respect, not just from others, but from the very people who once dismissed me. A week later, Sarah arrived for her internship. She was young, maybe 21, polite, sharp, and full of that hopeful energy I remembered having once upon a time. When she walked into my office, she extended her hand with a confident smile and said, "Mr. Walker, thank you for giving me this chance." I shook her hand, feeling a strange warmth in my chest. "It's Tom," I said. "Just Tom." She laughed softly. "Dad said you'd say that." We talked for a while about business, about her studies, about her father. She told me how things had changed at home, how her parents weren't together anymore, how Rick had mellowed out, started mentoring young agents instead of chasing fame. There was no bitterness in her tone, just honesty, you know. She said at one point, "Dad said losing everything was the best thing that ever happened to him. He said it taught him humility. He said he learned that lesson from you. That stopped me cold." I didn't know what to say. So I just nodded and smiled, because sometimes words ruin moments like that. Over the next few months, Sarah worked hard. She showed up early, stayed late, asked questions, and learned fast. She didn't act entitled or spoiled. She rolled up her sleeves and got her hands dirty in the garage, side by side with my crew. They liked her right away. She reminded me of the younger me, hungry to learn, eager to prove herself, humble enough to listen. One day, near the end of her internship, she came into my office with a file and said, "Mr. Walker, sorry, Tom, can I ask you something?" "Sure," I said, leaning back in my chair. She hesitated, then asked quietly, "Do you ever regret how things turned out? With my dad? With my mum?" The question hit harder than I expected. I looked at her, the daughter of the two people who had once turned my life upside down, and felt no resentment, no bitterness, just a calm understanding, regret. I said slowly, "No, I don't think I do. Life doesn't always give us what we want, but it usually gives us what we need. Your dad and your mum, they taught me something I could have never learned any other way. They taught me to stand on my own. And because of that, I got to build a life I'm proud of." She smiled softly, her eyes glistening. "I think they'd be proud of you too. Maybe, maybe not. But it didn't really matter anymore. When her internship ended, she wrote me a thank you letter. It wasn't long, just a few lines, but it ended with this sentence: "You showed me what integrity looks like, and I'll carry that lesson wherever I go." That night, I sat on the porch of my old house, the same one Mary once left me in. The crickets were chirping, and the summer air was warm. I thought about that first letter, the one she'd left all those years ago beside a cold cup of coffee. And now, all these years later, another letter had found me, one that healed where the first one had broken. The world really does have a funny way of coming full circle. I leaned back, looking up at the sky, and whispered to myself, "Guess we're even now, life." And I smiled, not because I'd won anything, but because I finally understood that the circle wasn't about revenge or redemption. It was about peace, about how everything we lose eventually returns in some new form, wiser and softer than before. Mary's laughter, Rick's arrogance, my pain, my rise, all of it had led here, to this quiet moment of stillness. Sometimes, I think life's biggest victories don't happen in boardrooms or bank accounts. They happen in the smallest gestures, like a handwritten letter from the daughter of the man who once tried to break you. And as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting a golden glow over my porch, I realized something that made me smile wider than I had in years. The circle wasn't just complete, it was perfect. It's been years now since everything happened, since the note, The heartbreak, the humiliation, the long nights spent rebuilding what was left of my pride. And yet, here I am, still in the same small town, still driving that same old pickup truck that's been with me through it all. The paint's a little faded now. The seat squeaks when I turn corners, but every scratch, every dent, every mile is a chapter of my story. I still get my coffee from the same diner, the one on Main Street where the waitress knows exactly how I take it to sugars, splash of cream. The same neon sign still flickers at night. The same old regulars sit at the counter swapping stories about the weather and baseball. To anyone else, it's just another sleepy corner of America. But to me, it's everything. It's home. The difference now isn't the town. It's me. I'm not the same man who once stood in that supermarket aisle, heart pounding in his chest while his ex-wife and her new man laughed in his face. I'm not the same man who spent nights staring at empty rooms and wondering if he'd ever be enough. No, that man died the day I decided to stop begging the world for approval and started building a life that made me proud. Funny how people think success is about shouting it from rooftops. Truth is, it's not. Real success is quiet. It's peace of mind. It's waking up every morning without bitterness in your chest. It's knowing you don't need to prove anything anymore. Not to your past. Not to your doubters. Not even to yourself. Sometimes people in town ask me, Tom, how'd you do it? How'd you turn it all around after what happened? And I always tell them the same thing. Simple, honest, from the heart. Never let someone else's laughter define your worth. Because that's what I learned the hard way, that people will laugh when they don't understand your journey. They'll mock what they fear. They'll underestimate what they can't control. And if you spend your life trying to silence every voice that doubts you, you'll lose yourself in the noise. But if you focus on growing, on rebuilding, on staying true to who you are, your silence eventually becomes louder than any insult they could ever throw. See, revenge fades. The satisfaction of getting even doesn't last forever. But rebuilding yourself, that's where the real power is. That's the kind of victory no one can take from you. Mary once said, I lived too small, that my dreams weren't big enough, that I didn't want more out of life. And for a while, I believed her. I thought maybe she was right, that a simple life wasn't enough. But she was wrong, because I finally realized something. Peace doesn't need noise. You don't need a mansion on the hill to feel successful. You don't need applause to feel seen. Sometimes success is just sitting on your porch with a warm cup of coffee, watching the sun rise, knowing that you made it through hell and came out stronger, softer and wiser. These days, I see Mary every now and then around town. We nod politely, exchange a few words. There's no bitterness left between us, just a quiet understanding. She's changed too. Time does that to people, and though there's no love left, there's no hate either. Just history, the kind that teaches more than it hurts. Rick. Last I heard, he moved to another city, running a small consulting firm. Word around is, he's calmer now, less arrogant. Maybe he found his peace too. Life has a way of humbling us all eventually, but me, I stay right here in the same house that once felt too empty, now filled with laughter from my grandkids when they visit on weekends. The same porch where I once sat heartbroken, now a place of reflection, not regret. The same sky above, the same town below, but a whole different man looking out at it. Every morning, as I sit there sipping my coffee, I watch the world wake up, the sun creeping over the horizon, The birds cutting through the mist, the trucks from my company heading out for their first runs of the day, my name on their sides, my legacy on the move. I smile, take another sip, and think about that note Mary left me all those years ago. Tom, I can't do this anymore. I need more. And I whisper to myself, not out of spite, but with gratitude, thank you. Mary, you gave me the reason to become more, because that's the truth. If she hadn't walked out, I never would have walked forward. If she hadn't laughed, I never would have learned how to let my silence speak. If she hadn't left, I never would have found the man I was meant to be. So, when people ask me if I believe in revenge, I tell them this: revenge is just noise. But growth is music, and peace. Peace is the quiet that follows once the song's been played. And every morning, when I take that last sip of coffee and set the mug down on the porch rail, I look out at the horizon, at the life I built with my own two hands, and I let the same 3 words roll off my tongue, softly, with a smile that only time can teach. Who's laughing now?